Well, we have an exciting couple months coming up. I know I sent it out in 2 different emails this week, but one more time, thank you guys so much for last week. That was just such a blessing to Brooke and I. We just really appreciate your appreciation. That was very unexpected, and we just really enjoyed that. Thank you. If you do have a middle schooler, I think they're all in there. Middle schoolers are in their small group this morning. But I want to let you know a few things coming up in November and in December here at the Vine Church family, all right? First one is next Sunday night, we're going to go, we're taking the young adults to the Phil Wickham concert. So we've organized that with the young adults, a part of the group here, high schoolers and young adults. If you would like to join us, it's just like open seating. If you guys, you can buy tickets and join us. We're going to be there. I can't remember, I think it was like 10 or 12 of us going there. I don't know. Brooke organized all that with our high schoolers and young adults. We're doing that. Then on Friday, November 19th, we have a ladies' night coming up at the Williams house. So contact Erin. You can talk with her this morning. Or, yes, David's excited about, yeah, David gets kicked out of the house for the ladies to come over. So, yeah, we'll hang out. That sounds good. Yeah, we'll have guys' night at the Headley house on Friday, November 19th. Just kidding. With all the children, true. With all the kids. Yes, so the house won't, it'll be burned down probably with all the children there. But no, Friday, November 19th, ladies' night. And then Sunday, November 21st, we're doing a Thanksgiving Sunday, all right, here. So we're going to do a bonfire after church. We're going to have a potluck that Sunday, but also during the service. You may or may not know this, but our elementary kids have been working on some songs, one or multiple songs, I don't know, multiple songs to sing before Thanksgiving. So they're going to do that on November the 21st. We'll also take communion that day. And it's just going to be a fun Thanksgiving Sunday, so you won't want to miss it. Also, for the potluck style, just bring something to share. Just whatever you want to bring is fine. It doesn't have to be Thanksgiving themed. It can be a cornucopia of food items. We'll see how it goes. I like to organize things, and and every time we do a potluck, I fight like this whole let's get a sign-up list, and you bring the meats, and it's like no, everybody just brings something, and it always works out. It's never not worked out. So we'll see. It better work out this time since I talked about it. And then we got a really fun December happening here as a church family. Okay, Sunday, December 5th, we're having an ugly sweater and hot chocolate Sunday. All right, so we have a hot chocolate bar with all kinds of accoutrements and things. And then also wear your best ugly sweater. Your goal is to outdo me in wearing an ugly sweater. But this year, I will take the sweater off before I preach, because the last couple times we did this, everyone says, I can't take you seriously talking about Jesus when you're wearing that cat sweater. So, but be a fun Sunday, December 5th. December 12th, we're going to have our Christmas candlelight family service. So the past couple years, we've done that the Sunday right before Christmas, but this year we moved it up a week. The last couple years, I know a lot of you, school gets out, on Thursday or Friday, and then you head to the family that first weekend, and you've been sad you missed it. So we're moving it up a week. So we're having that on Sunday, December 12th. We'll do our candlelight family service. All kids will be in here and everything, and we'll have just kind of our Christmas Eve, typical Christmas Eve type environment service on that day. It'll be fun. December the 19th, we're going to do Christmas Unplugged. So we're going to be here in acoustic style, family style. It'll be fun. And then Sunday, December 26th, we're going to do family church at home. What this means is the day after Christmas, and we thought about, all right, what are we going to do that Sunday and all that. I was like, you know what? One of the things that we're really passionate about here as a church family is to spend time with your actual family as well. So we're going to have a virtual service that day online, and we just encourage you to either hang out with someone else in the church family, go to someone's house and have church together in a home, or you can just be your immediate family. Maybe your grandparents or something is coming in, but I'd also encourage you, if you'd like to invite some other people over, to do that on the 26th. So that's November and December. I'll remind you of all those things as we get closer, but wanted to let you know what was happening. Connection card, giving, online. I feel like I've talked enough already about all this stuff, so let's move on. All right, we are continuing our series, Pursuing Jesus, today, and I am super pumped because Josh French, one of our worship leaders, is going to be talking about worship. So would you come on up, Josh, and let's give him a warm Vine Church welcome as he prepares to talk.
Thanks. Oh, man. There's a lot to talk about. So I trimmed it down a little bit. I started out, I was talking to Nathan about what I was going to talk about with worship, and we kind of settled on that I would talk about worship. And I kind of took the question of how do we pursue Jesus through worship as my question that I wanted to answer with this message. And so, I looked in the Bible, looked in Psalms, right, this huge collection of worship that's in the Bible. I looked at, David and his ministry, the Tabernacle of David, where he had 24/7 worship and prayer. There's so much about praise and worship that just in the book of Psalms, there's 7 different Hebrew words that they translate for praise and worship. And I could preach for days on just those 3 things. But I thought a really good place to start, right? There's a better question that I wanted to get to, and that was really it's fine to ask how do we worship and what are the right ways to worship and how do we pursue Jesus through worship. But I think the question that really answers all of that is what is worship? And I'll tell you, it's probably not what you expect. Worship, you see this team that comes up here every Sunday and plays music, and that's a form of worship. That's a way that we worship. It's a way that we honor God. It's also a way that we encourage other people. We encourage each other into holiness, into being a part of the family of God, and to really give theology, even in songs, to give what we believe about God, what we think about God. It helps us to be in unity. But it's just one expression. It's just one piece. It's one symptom of worship. And so to kind of give a little bit more context into this, I'm gonna talk about 3 different stories. And these 3 stories have a lot of context around them. They have a ton of stuff going on around them. I'll tell you what you need to know, but please, if you really want to know more about these stories, go read them, because there's a lot in here, and I want to be concise, and I want to get across what needs to be gotten across. So I'm going to talk first about the first place that worship is mentioned in the Bible. The first word that's translated worship is in Genesis chapter 22 with Abraham. Abraham is the man who God picked to start his nation through. Abraham gave birth to Isaac, and Isaac gave birth to Jacob, and Jacob was renamed Israel, and that's where Israel came from. That's where Jesus came from. So we're going to talk about Genesis chapter 22. Let me pull it up here so I can have it for me and for you. And we're going to start, I believe I have it starting in, verse 5. So before this, God has told Abraham to sacrifice his son. He said, Abraham, I want you to go sacrifice your son. I'm going to tell you a place you should go. Mount Moriah. It's a place called Moriah, and you're going to sacrifice your son there. And I like to think there's probably several hours missing text here of what Abraham went through before in the morning. It just says he got up and left. I'd like to think there's a lot more deliberation than that. Maybe not. Maybe not. But I like to think that, because that's a pretty big ask. So then we get through all this, and Abraham has brought a couple of guys with him and his son, and we get to verse 5. It says, Abraham told his servants, he could see the place just like from the distance, and he told his servants, stay here with the donkey. Abraham told the servants, the boy and I will travel a little further. We will worship there, and then we will come back. That's important. Keep that in your mind. Abraham is about to go sacrifice his son. God's told him to sacrifice his son, and Abraham says, we will be back. Okay? So then, verse 6, Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders while he carried the fire and the knife, and the two of them walked together. Again, second important thing. The means for the sacrifice that Abraham was about to perform was placed on the back of Isaac. It's important because it's a mirror of something else that happens much later in Scripture, and we'll get there. But verse 7, and I don't know if any of you have been here, but I like to think, my dad is like working on repairing something or fixing something, and like I can see he's missed something, and I can tell it's not going to work. And I know this, right? But I'm not going to just tell him. I'm not going to like, Dad, you're wrong, right? Like I sit there and like fiddle, with my thumbs for a minute, like, how do I say this so he doesn't get mad at me? He's already frustrated because he has to put the shelf on the wall, and now I know it's going to fall down so it's like, Dad, right? Like I know y'all been there. But I like to think Isaac here is doing this thing. He's walked off with his father, left the servants. It's just him. He's carrying the wood. His dad's got the fire. He's like, Dad? So verse 7, Isaac turned to Abraham, his father, and says, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. We have the fire and the wood, but where's the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham says, God will provide the sheep for the burnt offering, my son. Abraham answered, and they both walked on together. When they arrived at the place where God had told them to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it, and he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. That's pretty powerful. That's dedication. He didn't just walk to the place and think, yeah, okay, God's going to do something, so we'll get there and we'll just kind of wait for what God's going to do. He picked up the knife. He picked it up. He tied his son, put him on the wood, and picked him up. Picked up the knife. And the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. Yes, Abraham replied, here I am. Don't lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. Do not hurt him in any way. For now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Right? This here, going through verse 12, this is pretty powerful. This is the first place that worship is mentioned in the Bible. It's this moment of sacrifice. It's this reflection of Jesus on the cross, where his son Abraham has the wood stacked on his back to take to the mountain to be sacrificed. Right? It's this reflection of Jesus that happens almost 1,800 years before what happens on the cross, before Jesus. So that's pretty powerful, I think. And I'll come back to it because there's another story that ties in with this and that I'm going to talk about. So there's another story that I'm going to go for, and this story comes out of 2 Samuel. This is the story of David. David was the king in Israel, and he had been through a lot. He had become king. He had married the previous king's daughter. Her name was Michal, and her son was Saul, the king. Her dad was Saul, the king. And David had just recovered the Ark of the Covenant. It had been stolen, and there's a lot of context there. If you want to read all of that, it's a good story, and you can get a lot out of it. But I want to kind of go through the part where he gets it back and get to the part where he's bringing it back into Jerusalem. So he's got this ark, and he's dancing, and he's running around. And I've always heard this story from the perspective that David stripped off all his clothes and ran around in his underwear or naked. That's how everyone I've ever heard it has taught it. That David is dancing around just however he came into the world, and then his wife gets mad at him and is like, hey, you shouldn't do that. Okay, listen, if David stripped down naked in front of everyone and danced around, I'm kind of with Michal. But we'll see in a second. I want to read the story because the New Living Translation says it in a different way than most people preach it. I want to read that because it's important. So I'm going to read 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 14. David danced before the Lord with all his might, wearing a priestly garment. A lot of translations say an ephod. And a lot of times that's kind of talks about like a linen, like diaper almost, is what people think of it as. But here it says priestly garment. And we'll get to why that's important in a second. But David and all the people of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouts of joy and the blowing of ram's horns. But as the ark entered the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked down from her window. When she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she was filled with contempt for him. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place. And we'll skip a few verses here down to 20 because it just talks about David giving food to the people, celebrating, putting the ark back into the temple. In verse 20 it says, when David returned home to bless his own family, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet him. and this is like a master class in sass right here. She goes, "How distinguished the king of Israel looked today." Okay, right? Okay, there's something going on here. She's not being honest here. It's already told us that she was not happy, right? How distinguished the king of Israel looked today, shamelessly exposing himself to the servant girls like any vulgar person might do, right? And this is where a lot of people talk about, okay, Michael was upset that he was worshiping God, that he was doing what he should be to worship God. That's not what Michael was upset about. Remember, I said earlier, people like to preach that he was naked or in a diaper, but what it says here, what it's translated as, the word ephod, it means a priestly garment. It's kind of like an apron with two sides, right? You lay it on you, and it goes over your front and your back, and there's little shoulder straps. And did I put a picture in there of it? I don't remember. Okay, I took that out. I had a picture of it, but I took it out. And so what you see here is that David was wearing the garments of the priest. He wasn't wearing his robes, his kingly robes, and he was dancing around wildly. And what she says here, Michael says, shamelessly exposing. And that's a word there that's translated that. Sometimes it is translated to strip down naked, but what it means there, what it says there, it also means it's figurative. It means you've revealed yourself. It means you've revealed something about yourself. You've kind of exposed some kind of inner part of you, like who the real you is. It's kind of how that word is translated. And so Michael wasn't really upset that he was naked, because he wasn't. She was upset that he wasn't acting like a king. She was upset that he wasn't acting like her father acted, like the king, right? That's an important distinction because it matters to what David said next. David retorted to Michal, "I was dancing before the Lord, who chose me above your father and all his family. He appointed me as the leader of Israel, the people of the Lord, so I celebrate before the Lord." And go on to the next one, because there's something really interesting I want to point out here that the ESV version of the Bible here, I've been reading from New Living Translation, but the ESV right here, and you can ignore that F that I copied and pasted the wrong thing, but it says, she said to him, "How the king of Israel honored himself today." And he responds, "It was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house and appointed me as prince over Israel." The word there is not king. She uses the word king in the Hebrew. He uses the word prince. That's some humility right there. She's saying, how dare you treat the kingship of Israel like this? How dare you? Like, why have you you're giving up your kingship. You're giving up what gives you power. And he says, God made me prince over Israel, not king, right? This is something that it amazes me, that the humility of David here when he talks about this, when he realizes Israel wanted a king for so long, and they got Saul. They asked God, we want a king we can see, and they got Saul, and Saul was a king, right? But the whole point of God not wanting to give him the king was saying, I'm the king. I'm your king, follow me. And David says, I know that. God didn't make me the king over Israel. He's the king over Israel. He gave up something. He gave up something that God gave him. He sacrificed something. Right? This is where it ties in to the other story. Abraham takes his son up to the mountain. He's going to sacrifice his son. He's going to give up something. What was he sacrificing? What was Abraham sacrificing? Why was it important that he sacrificed something? His son was what he was going to kill his son, but he had to sacrifice something else first, something inside of himself. You don't just kill your son while you still love him, while you still have him in your arms and you say, I love him, I'm going to do anything to protect you, but now I'm going to kill you. He has sacrificed something inside of himself. He sacrificed the love of his son. He sacrificed the thing inside of himself that said, protect your son, something unseen, something hidden inside of himself, in his heart. He decided, God is greater than this. What did David give up? David gave up his kingship, just like I said. So he sacrificed something. And it wasn't like he was born and he looked like a king, so he was a king, which kind of was how Saul became king, right? He was born a shepherd. He didn't look like a king. He was given kingship. He was given the kingship of the land, and he gave it up again. Something he was given, something really that was just implicit inside of himself. You're the king. We don't, you can wear kingly robes, but he gave it up. He didn't wear the robes, right? So they both sacrificed something. So the first place that we see worship in the Bible is Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. And then we look at the person who probably wrote very many of the Psalms and one of the greatest worshipers that we know about, who set up a 24/7 prayer and worship church in Israel, sacrificing again. So it's amazing that those two places, that there's such a correlation there. But I told you that this story was a long spanning one. It goes longer than just to these two people. It goes almost 1,800 years past Abraham to just outside of Samaria. The Samaritan woman is at a well and meets Jesus. And in John chapter 4, we have this story of Jesus coming. He's just prophesied to her. He's told her everything there is about her. He's told her that she has had more than one husband, and the person she's living with is not her husband, and she knows this is a prophet, a man of God. And the thing about the Samaritans was that they had this thought about where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, right? The Samaritans believed that it was on this other mountain called Gerizim, and the Jews said, no, it was on this other mountain called Moriah, right? And Moriah is where they built the temples and where they worshiped God. So they said, if you don't worship God on Moriah, you're not worshiping God. And the Samaritans said, well, yeah, but we know it was on Gerizim. It's over here on this mountain, right? So there's been years and years and years of strife and possibly even bloodshed and hate between these people over where Abraham sacrificed his son, or was going to sacrifice his son. Right? So we get to Jesus, and Jesus is the Messiah, and he has this opportunity to clear it all up. He has this opportunity to say, you know what? Yes, it's over here at Mount Moriah. You guys are wrong, so just kind of deal with it. Come over here. Or no, yeah, Jews, you got it wrong. It's on Moriah. He had that opportunity. He didn't do it. What he says in verse 21, Jesus replies, she says, so I'll give you some context. She asked, the Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, where the Samaritans claim it is here at Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worshipped. And Jesus replies, believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when no matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem, you'll do neither. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him, for salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him in that way. For God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So here we are, 1,800 years after Abraham has sacrificed his son on this mountain, and there's people fighting over the right way to worship, the right place to worship, the right thing to do. How do we do this? What is the right way? And they're both convinced each other that their way is the right way. And Jesus, having the opportunity to clear it up and bring peace to the situation, instead says, you're both wrong. It doesn't matter. It's not about the place. It's not about what you're doing, right? When he says God is spirit, that word spirit, that's it's kind of an interesting word, because to us, spirit, you can say like ghost or, kind of ethereal, weird place. And that's kind of what it is in the Greek when it's in the New Testament. That's kind of what that means. But it also kind of talks about like your vital essence is the way it's defined. The way it's translated is like the part inside of you that makes you you, the part that makes you alive, the part that makes you conscious, your spirit. It says God is spirit. He's not bound by a body, by the laws of physics and nature. God is spirit. So here we are. Jesus is telling this woman, it doesn't matter. Don't you realize that this is about what's inside of you? It's not about the actions you take. It's not about the things you do. It's not about where you do it. It's not about any of those things. And I think a lot of us have, and I've kind of held on to this definition as well too, and I've asked a lot of people this question about what is worship. And usually you get an answer like, it's music, or it's art, or it's a way that we honor God, or we glorify God, and those are good definitions. I think the most common one I hear that's repeated a lot is it's an outward expression of an inward heart condition. And that's good, and that points you in the right direction, but I think there's something a little bit deceiving about that. And here's what it is, and it's not wrong, really, but it kind of implies that worship is the outward expression, right? That the outward expression is the worship of something going on. But I want to tell you that according to what Jesus is saying about God being spirit and worshiping in spirit and in truth, worship is the inward condition. It's not the outward expression. Worship is the thing inside of you that you sacrifice that allows you to express. And that expression is the symptom of what's going on. That's not the worship, but the worship is the inward condition. Right? Abraham, before he was going to sacrifice his son, he was going to do it. He'd picked up the knife. It wasn't God's going to provide, so I'm not really going to do this. He'd already made the decision. He'd killed his son in his heart. He'd done it in his heart. He'd already decided that was what's going to happen, and the angel had to stop Abraham. He wasn't just waiting around for it to happen. David gave up his kingship. He was there, ready. He was the king. He had been given the authority of over all of Israel, over God's people, and he said, I'm giving that back to God. That belongs to God. He's the king, I'm not the king. I'm the prince. I'm just the one that's here to rule over the people while everyone is waiting on the Messiah. So how do we pursue Jesus through worship then, right? So we've got this thought that and we've got this idea in our hearts that, okay, worship is not necessarily the physical expression. It's not just what happens up here. It's not just what happens out there when we sing. It's more than art. It's more than our actions. It's a heart condition. Worship is the inward condition. It is the thing that we have decided in ourselves. We will worship God. We'll give him what he's given us. That's all we can do. He's given us everything, and we can give it back to him. And I think, honestly, it's to give some examples, because I think it's really important to know that worship is much grander and goes much farther than we think it does. When someone decides to take time out of their life to give up a career or give up a prize or give up something to pursue God, that's just as much of an expression of worship as it is to sing a song on a Sunday. When you choose to not just give up a good example, someone says, hey, you found this lost dog, you get $1,000 reward for this, and you decide, you know what, someone else found it, I just kind of helped to bring it here, so I don't deserve that reward, right? When you've decided in your heart that the reward you're getting, the thing that you get, God doesn't ask us to sacrifice it all and we're all going to live poor and needy in the streets. He didn't say that, right? That's not what it's about. It's not about that, okay, now I have to give away everything I am. When Jesus came to the young ruler in I think it was Matthew, I can't remember the chapter now, but he came to the young ruler and he said, Master, what do I have to do? I want to follow you. And he said, have you obeyed all the commandments? Have you given everything, given to the poor? Do you obey the law? And he's like, yes, I've done all of that stuff. What else do I need to do? And Jesus says to him, okay, go and sell everything you have and then come back. And the guy walked away sad and it said that Jesus said, it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Right? Why is that? Why was that such a big deal? It wasn't that Jesus needed him to sell the things. It was that Jesus needed him to be willing to sell the things. It was that heart condition that said, when I speak, you act. It's obedience. It's this this idea that, yeah, it's not that money makes it hard for you to enter into the kingdom of heaven, but placing money in your heart where God should be, that's what makes it hard to enter the kingdom of heaven. And worship is those things that when you sacrifice that money and say, even though I have this money, I would give it all away in an instant if you told me. That's worship. And I don't want to belittle or discredit anything that happens on this stage, because that's not what this is about. When we come together and we sing worship and we sing praises and we lift our hands, all of those things, they're all in those 7 words I talked about, those 7 words for praise. They're all there in the scripture. There's all basis for that. It's important. Paul says that we should encourage each other with songs and hymns and spiritual songs. It's one of the most effective ways we have to join together in worship. Giving up something of ourselves, our voice, to God. It's one of the most effective ways we have to come together in unity as worship, but it's not worship. And so I just want to put that out to you guys to listen and to understand and to hear about what God is saying about worship through these stories, through these sacrifices that these people made. Even if they didn't have to go through with it, it was done in their heart. Just like Jesus said, you've heard it say, don't murder, but I say to you, if you hate your brother in your heart, you've committed murder. It's the same idea. It's the same idea that there's something that happens in our heart, something that happens in our innermost being, in our spirit, that causes this to happen, that creates this expression outwardly. And by that token, by that nature, the greatest act of worship that any of you could ever do is salvation. What do we sacrifice when we get saved? Have you ever thought about that, right? We don't really have anything to give, and Jesus says that it's by faith that we're saved, and we believe in him, we confess with our mouth, and we're saved. That's true, that's right. I'm not saying anything against that. That's correct. But we also sacrifice something to do that, and that's ourselves. It's our nature. It's saying that we know enough, that we are enough, that we don't have to have God. So salvation itself is this amazing act of worship, saying I'm sacrificing my belief that I'm enough, and I'm sacrificing my belief that I can do it and that I don't need God, and saying I do need God. I need him. And that in itself is probably the first act of worship that anyone does, is coming to Christ and saying, I'm not enough. I need you. I believe that you're the Son of God, and I want to be saved, and I need you. So, wrapping up here, I think I went on this journey for a long time, and I looked through a lot of stuff, and there's a lot that I could have talked about, and a lot that I could have said about the different words and how they correspond to music and art and working in our jobs and our daily lives and our prayer lives. And they're good, and if you want to know about those, I'll be glad to talk to you about them. I'll be glad to put out give you some stuff to read and to learn about. But all of that is trumped by this idea that something inside of us changes, and we're willing to give up everything for Christ. So what I want to do to close us out is I want to pray a prayer for all of you and for myself about really, truly worshiping God in spirit and in truth. There's times when full disclosure, there's times I stand up here and I'm singing the words and I'm playing the music and I'm not worshiping. Full disclosure. My heart is somewhere else. I put something else in the place of God in that moment, and I'm just going through the motions. There's times I stand up there and that breaks me when I realize that I've taken something from God. I've put something in the place of God, and there's times. So I'm not saying that just because you get to come up on a stage or I'm saying this that I've figured something out and that I'm better. No. We all need to sacrifice things in our lives. And I'm not saying you have to go out and sell everything you have and you have to follow Jesus by being a poor beggar who just rambles on the street corner about God and nobody listens to you. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's something inside of us that changes, that we're willing to submit everything we have to God. And so I want to say a prayer today to close us out, to have God give us strength and give us mercy to be able to do that. Father God, you're worthy of our worship. You're worthy of our praise, our adoration. You're worthy of the songs we sing and the songs that we play. You're worthy of the art we create. You're worthy of the things we do in our lives. You're worthy of the honor of our work when we work. You're worthy of the honor of us submitting everything we have to you, even though everything we have comes from you. We don't want to hold on to something and put something into the place of you in our hearts, God. We want you to be the one who comes into our heart and sits on the throne of our heart inside of us, where when you act and when you speak, we can act. When you say something, we can respond. Where we hold nothing in greater value than it is to you. Where we put nothing in the place of you. We don't worship idols, God. I thank you, God, that you move in us and that the very act of worship, that our submission to you, our becoming a believer, our salvation, we thank you for that. And we want to worship you in it, and we want to continue to worship you. So, Father, would you help us? Would you show us places in our lives where we've raised up things higher than you, and where we've lowered you to a lower standard, where we wouldn't give you something that you would ask? Father, would you operate on our hearts in a way that when we come out of this building, Lord, that we know something new about you, that we can put into our heart this unending desire to glorify you and do for you, and that we'll give anything for you, God. And we thank you for the good blessings you have given us. The money and the homes and the families and the friends and this church and this building and the good gifts, God, that you've given us. We thank you for them, and we say, God, they're yours, and they're yours to do with what you will. And we praise you in everything